Hi, fifth graders. My name is Miss Terenzi. For those of you who don't know me, I am filling in for Mrs. Trumbull until the end of the year, so you will be seeing me around your reading, writing, and math videos from now until the end of the year. It's so nice to meet you all. Today we are going to continue with our book tastings that Mrs. Trumbull has begun for you. Today's book is called Tuck Everlasting, and it is by Natalie Babbitt. This book falls under the fantasy fiction genre, so if you're interested in fiction, especially those with some sort of magical fantasy elements, then this may be a book for you. You'll notice on the cover, this is the cover, there are several different cover arts. This is just one of them. It says, "What if you could live forever?" What clue does that give us about what this book might be about? Let's take a look at the back. Timeless, flawless, exciting. Is eternal life a blessing or a curse? That is what young Winnie Foster must decide when she discovers a spring on her family's property whose waters grant immortality. Immortality is a word that means living forever. Members of the Tuck family, having drunk from the spring, tell Winnie of their experiences watching life go by and never growing older. But then Winnie must decide whether or not to keep the Tucks secret and whether or not to join them on their never-ending journey. So we've gotten a little bit of background information. The main character is Winnie Foster. I'm guessing that this might be her on the front cover. I see some sort of little reptile that she's holding. Maybe that might have to do with her having a pet. I'm noticing that the colors on the cover are a little bit ominous or mysterious. They're not very bright. They seem a little bit dark and kind of eerie. I'm not sure what that might have to do with the book. On the back, it's yellow. Yellow's sort of a bright color, happy color. So let's take a look inside. Okay, so we have Tuck Everlasting. The prologue. For those of you who may not have seen a prologue before, I'm sure you have. A prologue is sort of a prequel to the first chapter. It gives us a little bit of background information. Let me see if I can zoom out a little bit. There we go. And boys and girls, I'm going to read a couple of chapters. I know that Mrs. Trumbull usually reads the first chapter. However, the first chapter is only about a page and a half, so we will read a little bit more than that. The first week of August hangs at the very top of summer, the top of the livelong year, like the highest seat of a Ferris wheel when it pushes in its turning. The weeks that come before are only a climb from balmy spring, and those that follow a drop to the chill of autumn, but the first week of August is motionless and hot. It is curiously silent, too, with blank white dawns and glaring noons, and sunsets smeared with too much color. Often at night there is lightning, but it quivers all alone. There is no thunder, no relieving rain. There are strange and breathless days, the dog days, when people are led to do things they are sure to be sorry for after. One day at a time, not so very long ago, 3 things happened, and at first there appeared to be no connection between them. At dawn, May Tuck set out on her horse for the wood at the edge of the village of Tree Gap. She was going there, as she did once every 10 years, to meet her 2 sons, Miles and Jesse. At noontime, Winnie Foster, whose family owned the Tree Gap wood, lost her patience at last and decided to think about running away. And at sunset a stranger appeared at the Fosters' gate. He was looking for someone, but he didn't say who. No connection, you would agree. But things can come together in strange ways. The wood was at the center, the hub of the wheel. All wheels must have a hub. A Ferris wheel has one, as the sun is the hub of the wheeling calendar. Fixed points they are, and best left undisturbed, for without them nothing holds together. But sometimes people find this out too late. So we've already gotten some background information. May Tuck has 2 sons, Miles and Jesse, and every 10 years they come to the village of Tree Gap, which is owned by Winnie Foster's family, and Winnie is our main character. Chapter 1. The road that led to Tree Gap had been trod out long before by a herd of cows who were, to say the least, relaxed. It wandered along in curves and easy angles, swayed off and up in a pleasant tangent to the top of a small hill, ambled down again between fringes of bee-hung clover, and then cut sidewise across a meadow. Here its edges blurred. It widened and seemed to pause, suggesting tranquil bovine picnics, slow chewing and thoughtful contemplation of the infinite, and then it went on again and came at last to the wood. But on reaching the shadows of the first trees, it veered sharply, swung out in a wide arc, as if for the first time it had reason to think where it was going, and passed around. On the other side of the wood, the sense of easiness dissolved. The road no longer belonged to the cows. It became instead, and rather abruptly, the property of people. And all at once the sun was uncomfortably hot, the dust oppressive, and the meager grass along its edges somewhat ragged and forlorn. On the left stood the first house, a square and solid cottage, with a touch-me-not appearance, surrounded by grass cut painfully to the quick and enclosed by a capable iron fence, some 4 feet high, which clearly said, "Move on, we don't want you here." So the road went humbly by and made its way, past cottages more and more frequent but less and less forbidding, into the village. But the village doesn't matter, except for the jailhouse and the gallows. The first house only is important. The first house, the road, and the wood. There was something strange about the wood. If the look of the first house suggested that you'd better pass it by, so did the look of the wood, but for quite a different reason. The house was so proud of itself that you wanted to make a lot of noise as you passed, and maybe even throw a rock or two, but the wood had a sleeping, other-world appearance that made you want to speak in whispers. This, at least, is what the cows must have thought. Let it keep its peace. We won't disturb it. Whether the people felt that way about the wood or not is difficult to say. There were some, perhaps, who did, but for the most part the people followed the road around the wood because that was the way it led. So already, boys and girls, we see a lot of descriptive language. We're getting a very vivid image of what this area looks like in Tree Gap. And I'm noticing that it seems to go along with the eeriness of the front cover. There's something a little mysterious and eerie about this area. Not very welcoming and pleasant, it seems like. There was no road through the wood, and anyway, for the people, there was no other reason to leave the wood itself. It belonged to the Fosters, the owners of the Touch-Me-Not cottage, and was therefore private property in spite of the fact that it lay outside the fence and was perfectly accessible. The ownership of land is an odd thing when you come to think of it. How deep, after all, can it go? If a person owns a piece of land, does he own it all the way down in ever-narrowing dimensions till it meets all other pieces at the center of the earth? Or does the ownership consist only of a thin crust under which the friendly worms have never heard of trespassing? In any case, the wood being on top, except of course for its roots, was owned bud and bow by the Fosters in the Touch-Me-Not cottage, and if they went there, if they never wandered in among the trees, well, that was their affair. Winnie, the only child of the house, never went there, though she sometimes stood inside the fence, carelessly banging a stick against the iron bars and looked at it. But she had never been curious about it. Nothing ever seems interesting when it belongs to you, only when it doesn't. And what is interesting, anyway, about the slim few acres of trees? There will be a dimness shot through the bars of sunlight, a great many squirrels and birds, a deep, damp mattress of leaves on the ground, and all the other things just as familiar, if not so pleasant, things like spiders, thorns, and grubs. In the end, however, it was the cows who were responsible for the wood's isolation. And the cows, through some wisdom they were not wise enough to know they had possessed, were very wise indeed. If they had made their road through the wood instead of around it, then the people would have followed the road. The people would have noticed the giant ash tree at the center of the wood, and then, in time, they'd have noticed the little spring, bubbling up among its roots, in spite of the pebbles piled there to conceal it. And that would have been a disaster so immense that this weary old earth, owned or not, to its fiery core, would have trembled on its axis like a beetle on a pin. Let's see how long the next chapter is. I think we have some time to read it. Chapter 2. And so at dawn that day in the first week of August, May Tuck woke up and lay for a while, beaming at the cobwebs on the ceiling. At last she said aloud, "The boys will be home tomorrow." May's husband, on his back beside her, did not stir. He was still asleep, and the melancholy creases that folded his daytime face were smoothed and slack. He snored gently, and for a moment the corners of his mouth turned upward in a smile. Tuck almost never smiled except in sleep. May sat up in bed and looked at him tolerantly. "The boys will be home tomorrow," she said again, a little bit more loudly. Tuck twitched, and the smile vanished. He opened up his eyes. "Why'd you have to wake me up?" he sighed. "I was having that dream again. The good one where we're all in heaven and never heard of Tree Gap." May sat there frowning, a great potato of a woman, with a round, sensible face and calm brown eyes. "It's no use having that dream," she said. "Nothing's going to change." "You tell me that every day," said Tuck, turning away from her on his side. "Anyways, I can't help what I dream." "Maybe not," said May, "but all the same, you should have got used to things by now." Tuck groaned. "I'm going back to sleep," he said. "Not me," said May. "I'm going to take the horse and go down to the wood to meet them." "Meet who?" "The boys, Tuck, our sons. I'm going to ride down to meet them." "Better not do that," said Tuck. "I know," said May, "but I just can't wait to see them. Anyways, it's 10 years since I went to Tree Gap. No one'll remember me. I'll ride in at sunset, just to the wood. I won't go into the village. But even if someone did see me, they won't remember. They never did before, now did they?" "Suit yourself, then," said Tuck into his pillow. "I'm going back to sleep." May Tuck climbed out of bed and began to dress. 3 petticoats, a rusty brown shirt, and one enormous pocket, an old cotton jacket, and a knitted shawl, which she pinned across her bosom with a tarnished metal brooch. Okay, so she's going back into town, May and Tuck. They're married. Her sons are back, and she said she hasn't been to Tree Gap in 10 years, and she's hoping no one will recognize her. May ignored. Oops, I messed my spot. The sounds of her dressing were so familiar to Tuck that he could say, without opening his eyes, "You don't need that shawl in the middle of summer." May ignored this observation. Instead, she said, "Will you be all right? We won't get back till late tomorrow." Tuck rolled over and made a rueful face at her. "What in the world could possibly happen to me?" "That's so," said May. "I keep forgetting." "I don't," said Tuck. "Have a nice time." And in a moment, he was asleep again. Interesting. So he was having a good dream before about being in heaven and have never heard of Tree Gap. So he's wishing that he had never even heard of Tree Gap in the first place. And now he's saying, "What in the world could possibly happen to me?" And she said, "I keep forgetting." So I'm wondering what's going on here. May sat at the edge of the bed and pulled on a pair of short leather boots so thin and soft with age it was a wonder they held together. Then she stood and took from the washstand beside the bed a little square-shaped object, a music box painted with roses and lilies of the valley. It was the one pretty thing she owned, and she never went anywhere without it. Her fingers strayed to the winding key on its bottom, but glancing at the sleeping Tuck, she took her head, gave the little box a pat, and dropped it into her pocket. Then, last of all, she pulled over her ears a blue straw hat with a drooping, exhausted brim. But before she put on the hat, she brushed her gray-brown hair and wound it into a bun at the back of her neck. She did this quickly and skillfully, without a single glance in the mirror. May Tuck didn't need a mirror, though she had one popped up on the washstand. She knew very well what she were to see in it. Her reflection had long since ceased to interest her, for May Tuck and her husband, and Miles and Jessie, too, had all looked exactly the same for 87 years. Very interesting. All right, we're going to stop there, boys and girls. Please make sure that you are filling out your book tasting response. Don't forget to add in a fun GIF. Explain why you did it. Make sure you're answering in complete sentences the following 2 questions. How did the author hook the reader? Did it work for you? Why or why not? And, oops, I forgot to answer my second question. Technically it's the 3rd question. So you will see it down below as well when you go to open this assignment. Okay? All right, let us know if you have any questions.